There is a brutal, undeniable logic to the way a superpower wages war from the sky. Every military planner on the planet deeply understands that the exact sequence in which aircraft are sent into a combat zone is never a coincidence. It is a direct and terrifying readout of exactly how lethal the skies truly are. When you are kicking down the door of a heavily fortified nation, you send your absolute best. You send the stealth fighters. You send the billion-dollar bombers. You send the invisible machines explicitly built to survive in an airspace where a highly sophisticated enemy can still violently fight back. The machines that come after them belong to a completely different reality. You send the close air support, you send the attack helicopters, you send the slow, loud, and heavy platforms that fly just a few thousand feet above the dirt. They are absolutely not designed to survive in a heavily contested environment. They are designed to completely dominate when that hostile environment no longer exists. That specific sequence tells you the entire unspoken story of a war. And right now, the Pentagon is flying those exact slow second-wave machines freely over the nation of Iran. The official press briefings in Washington are carefully dancing around the reality on the ground, but the undeniable presence of the A-10 Warthog over the Strait of Hormuz speaks significantly louder than any politician ever could. You only send these highly vulnerable, low-flying platforms when the adversary has absolutely no meaningful air defenses left. For decades, Tehran spent billions of US dollars building a massive, layered fortress of advanced Russian missile systems and early warning radar networks. They built that exact architecture to make an American air campaign entirely too costly to survive. Today, that massive multi-billion-dollar fortress is nothing but smoking rubble. The skies over the Middle East are broken, the stealth phase is completely over, and the Warthogs are officially hunting. When the general public pictures the systematic destruction of a modern military, they almost always imagine something highly kinetic. They picture massive explosions tearing through the desert night. They picture deafening shockwaves shattering glass and steel. But that is fundamentally a 20th century understanding of warfare. In the modern era, the most terrifying weapon is absolutely silent. Within the first 24 hours of this new campaign, military commanders confidently announced that an astonishing 80% of the Iranian air defense systems had been completely destroyed or disabled. For a nation of that immense geographic size, that number seems physically impossible. And if you are only counting traditional bombs dropping from the sky, it absolutely is impossible. To understand how this catastrophic collapse actually happened, you have to look backward. The initial fatal wounds were actually inflicted months earlier, during Operation Midnight Hammer in June of 2025. That highly targeted campaign punched severe holes in the Iranian defensive network, but the political establishment in Tehran fundamentally failed to understand that the true attack was not over. When the current operation officially launched, the vanguard was not carrying bunker-busting munitions. The assault was quietly spearheaded by EA-18G Growler aircraft. These highly specialized machines do not drop conventional explosives. They drop absolute digital darkness. They utilized advanced jamming systems to systematically disrupt and overwhelm Iranian radar networks. And while the Growlers screamed through the atmosphere, space-based systems positioned high above the Earth added another impenetrable layer of electronic interference. The immediate result was not merely the physical destruction of metal and wire, it was the temporary blinding of an entire national defense architecture. Across the country, highly sophisticated radar screens suddenly went blank. Underground command centers were violently severed from their own missile batteries. The American electronic assault flawlessly created massive, invisible corridors of totally suppressed airspace, allowing non-stealth platforms to casually fly right through the heart of the country. The most devastating slaughter of this entire conflict was entirely invisible to the naked eye. The defense batteries were digitally paralyzed before they ever saw a physical threat on their screens. This is the brutal reality of the 21st century. The ultimate weapon is no longer just high explosives, it is weaponized data, and whoever ruthlessly controls the electromagnetic spectrum entirely controls the destiny of the battlefield. To truly understand why the American military resurrected an aircraft from the 1970s, you must look directly at the most dangerous stretch of water on the planet. The Strait of Hormuz is a brutal geopolitical choke point where roughly 20% of the traded oil in the entire world must squeeze through a dangerously narrow channel. When that vital artery is violently choked, global oil prices instantly surge past $100 per barrel, and the entire global economy begins to suffocate. The Iranian military strategy in this specific waterway is incredibly lethal. They do not rely on massive, expensive destroyers. Their strategy is centered entirely on the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy and their terrifying swarm tactics. They utilize hundreds of small, highly maneuverable, fast-attack watercraft. These boats are specifically designed to ruthlessly swarm much larger commercial and military vessels, completely paralyzing the strait. If the Pentagon attempts to neutralize this maritime threat using their prized $100 million stealth fighters, they immediately fall into a devastating mathematical trap. An F-35 flies far too fast and way too high to effectively hunt speedboats. More importantly, its internal payload is limited to a handful of incredibly expensive precision munitions. Dropping a multi-million-dollar smart bomb to destroy a cheap fiberglass speedboat is exactly how a superpower bankrupts itself in a war of attrition. This is precisely where the ugly, heavy, and incredibly slow A-10 Warthog becomes the absolute apex predator. The Warthog is a precise, unforgiving match for the Iranian swarm. Operating on the southern flanks of the strait, the aircraft carries the AGM-65 Maverick air-to-surface missile. With a striking range of over 17 miles, the Warthog can effortlessly locate and completely neutralize a fast attack vessel long before that boat can even pose a threat to commercial shipping. But the true nightmare for the swarm is mounted directly in the nose of the aircraft. The Warthog is built around the massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon. It is a 7-barreled rotary gun firing nearly 4,000 rounds of depleted uranium per minute. That weapon can tear through armor and rip a fast attack boat into completely unrecognizable pieces in a matter of seconds. In the chaotic, highly congested waters of the Persian Gulf, the American military absolutely does not need an invisible, delicate scalpel. They desperately need a flying chainsaw, and the Warthog is delivering exactly that brutal capability. The politicians and generals in Washington love a specific, highly intoxicating phrase. They confidently call it air supremacy. Two former commanders of U.S. Central Command have publicly used that exact definitive terminology to describe the current skies over the Middle East. But there is a massive, highly lethal difference between a sterile military briefing and the brutal reality on the ground. Eradicating 80% of a national air defense network is an undeniable, monumental military achievement. But in a brutal war of attrition, 80% is absolutely not 100%. The massive physical destruction of the integrated network did not leave behind a completely harmless nation. It left behind scattered, highly isolated remnants. It left behind desperate soldiers armed with shoulder-mounted launchers and residual missile batteries hiding in the shadows. These fragmented units are entirely incapable of stopping a massive, multi-platform air campaign. But they are absolutely a persistent, degraded threat that is actively extracting real blood and treasure from the American military. The absolute proof of this lingering danger violently shattered the American illusion in early April. For the first time in over 20 years, American aircraft were brought down by hostile fire. A U.S. Air Force F-15E Strike Eagle crashed into the terrain, leaving a crew member missing behind enemy lines. Shortly after, an A-10 Thunderbolt itself went down near the vital Strait of Hormuz. The comfortable narrative of a clean, entirely sanitized war is rapidly crumbling. The human cost of this massive campaign is undeniably real, and it is steadily rising. Operation Epic Fury has already resulted in 13 American service members killed in action and 365 wounded. The political class arrogantly assumed that owning the sky meant the war was essentially won. But controlling the atmosphere above a nation absolutely does not mean you have safely conquered the earth below it. There is a fatal disease that constantly infects the minds of imperial architects. It is the Hollywood illusion. The mainstream television networks are currently discussing a potential ground operation near Isfahan as if it were a simple 90-minute action movie. The stated objective is undeniably critical: American forces must secure or remove approximately 970 pounds of uranium, dangerously enriched to 60%. But this massive stockpile is not casually sitting in a warehouse. It is deeply buried inside highly fortified tunnels, located more than 300 feet beneath solid mountain rock. Let us deeply analyze the terrifying logistical reality that the insulated political class in Washington is deliberately ignoring. You absolutely cannot extract that radioactive material with a swift surgical nighttime raid. To physically execute this unprecedented mission, the Pentagon would be forced to fly massive, heavy excavation equipment directly into hostile territory. They would be forced to engineer and completely construct a massive dirt runway in the middle of the Iranian desert just to land the heavy cargo aircraft required to haul the material away. This is absolutely not a quick extraction. This is a massive, highly vulnerable engineering project that would take weeks, if not agonizing months, to complete. And for every single second of that extended timeline, American service members would be stationary targets on Iranian soil under relentless, active combat conditions. The 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit has already been aggressively moved into the region. The president has been officially briefed on this exact blueprint. But the politicians sitting in comfortable, air-conditioned rooms are completely detached from the brutal reality of the Zagros Mountains. Imagine the sheer vulnerability of thousands of Marines pinned down in a static location, desperately trying to dig through 300 feet of stone while entirely surrounded by a hostile nation of 90 million people. If Washington orders boots onto that specific ground, they are willfully walking into the greatest, most devastating military meat grinder since the jungles of Vietnam. It is a calculated suicide mission, born purely from the catastrophic arrogance of an empire that blindly believes it can conquer basic geography. The physical battlefield is only one single dimension of this massive conflict. To truly understand the catastrophic damage currently unfolding, you must look away from the smoldering deserts of the Middle East and look directly at the global financial markets. While the military remains entirely focused on the skies, a silent economic doomsday machine has been activated in the waters below. When Tehran officially declared the Strait of Hormuz closed, global oil prices instantly surged past $100 per barrel. But that terrifying number is merely the opening tremor of a much larger financial earthquake. This incredibly narrow waterway is the absolute jugular vein of the globalized economy, carrying roughly 20% of the traded oil for the entire world. Today, that vital artery is violently choked. While a tiny, desperate trickle of merchant vessels slowly attempts the dangerous crossing, normal commercial shipping has completely come to a dead halt. The economic pressure currently crushing the global trading system is severe and entirely unprecedented. It is not just about the raw price of crude oil. The hidden astronomical costs of maritime insurance premiums have absolutely paralyzed global shipping lines. The resulting shockwaves are already tearing through the European continent. 5 major European Union nations, including industrial powerhouses like Germany, Italy, and Spain, are currently panicking, aggressively pushing for a windfall tax on energy companies just to keep their domestic economies from violently collapsing. Yet, the political class in Washington remains entirely detached from this looming financial apocalypse. The political establishment recently declared on social media that the United States could simply open the strait, take the oil, and make a massive fortune. That is a terrifying level of economic delusion. You absolutely cannot fix a completely shattered global supply chain with a simplistic political slogan. When the cost of global energy becomes highly unstable, every single product on the shelves of American grocery stores becomes astronomically expensive. Domestic inflation is poised to completely explode, wiping out the life savings of the American working class. More importantly, the absolute foundation of American global power, the petrodollar system, is being systematically starved of the vital energy trade it requires to survive. This is the brutal new architecture of modern warfare. The empire is not merely bleeding soldiers, it is actively bleeding the very currency that keeps it alive. While the American media obsessively covers the fiery destruction of radar arrays and the dramatic collapse of the Iranian air defense network, they are completely ignoring the most terrifying aspect of this entire war. It is not the noise of the exploding bunker buster bombs that should keep military commanders awake at night. It is the deafening, unnatural silence of the ghosts. Look across the entire Middle East right now. Tehran has spent the last 2 decades meticulously building the most lethal and sophisticated proxy network in the history of modern warfare. They built Hezbollah in Lebanon, armed with hundreds of thousands of precision rockets pointing directly at American allies. They armed the Houthis in Yemen, who have already proven they can entirely shut down the Red Sea. They embedded countless heavily armed militias deep inside Iraq and Syria, practically surrounding isolated American military outposts. When Operation Epic Fury began and the Iranian high command was violently targeted, military analysts fully expected this massive shadow army to immediately erupt. They expected a chaotic, region-wide explosion of violence. But that did not happen. Instead, the axis of resistance went completely dark. They went entirely silent. The political establishment in Washington arrogantly interpreted this silence as absolute fear. They proudly claimed the proxies were terrified by the overwhelming display of American air supremacy. But if you analyze this through the cold, unforgiving lens of game theory, you realize they are completely misreading the enemy. This is a highly calculated, ruthlessly disciplined silence. This decentralized ghost army operates on a fundamental doctrine of asymmetrical warfare. They deeply understand that if they launch a massive, coordinated strike right now, they will be immediately slaughtered from the sky by American Warthogs and stealth bombers. So, they simply refuse to fight the empire on its own terms. They wait. They are actively watching the Pentagon publicly debate sending ground troops into Isfahan. They are waiting for the arrogant, fatal moment when the United States definitively decides to put vulnerable American boots onto Iranian soil. The moment the empire commits its ground forces, the dynamic of the entire war permanently changes. The proxy network absolutely does not want to fight a supersonic American fighter jet in the clouds. They want to fight an exhausted American Marine in the bloody dirt. They are deliberately baiting the United States into walking directly into a massive, region-wide insurgency. The silence is not a surrender. The silence is the trap finally closing. If you want to understand the true scale of this geopolitical trap, you must look far beyond the burning borders of the Middle East. The political establishment in Washington is obsessively focused on the tactical battlefield directly in front of them. They are endlessly tracking Warthogs and fast attack boats. But while American fighter jets confidently patrol the lower skies over Iran, the absolute highest ground in this war is quietly occupied by someone else entirely. The atmosphere directly above the conflict zone is currently swarming with advanced military intelligence satellites completely controlled by Beijing and Moscow. The Eastern Axis is watching every single move the American empire makes, and they are absolutely not innocent bystanders. The mainstream television networks repeatedly state that the Strait of Hormuz is completely closed, but that is a highly selective Western illusion. The strait is essentially closed to American and European commercial shipping. Strategically, however, Chinese vessels have historically navigated these heavily contested waters with absolute immunity. Beijing is the primary buyer of Iranian crude. The massive Chinese economy fundamentally requires that vital, discounted energy supply to survive, and they will absolutely not sit idly by while the American military dismantles their most important energy partner. Simultaneously, the Russian Federation views Tehran as an absolutely critical military ally and a vital supplier of advanced drone technology. Moscow simply cannot afford to let the Iranian defense industrial base completely collapse. But the Eastern Axis is incredibly disciplined. They will never make the fatal mistake of sending their own uniformed soldiers into this Middle Eastern meat grinder. Whack! They do not need to fire a single physical bullet to severely cripple the United States. Instead, they are actively arming the Iranian resistance with the most lethal weapon of the 21st century. They are providing real-time, space-based intelligence. They are silently feeding Tehran the exact coordinates of American naval assets. They are utilizing their massive cyber warfare capabilities to quietly probe American vulnerabilities and actively shield Iranian command networks. Beijing and Moscow are the invisible architects of this prolonged war of attrition. They have brilliantly realized that they do not need to directly fight the American empire. They just need to quietly provide the intelligence required to keep the United States violently bleeding in the desert while they methodically secure control over the rest of the global board. The clock is currently ticking down on the most dangerous geopolitical standoff of the 21st century. The American president has officially issued a strict 48-hour ultimatum to Tehran. The demand is brutally simple: completely reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or face a massive, unprecedented escalation of American military force. But ultimatums are incredibly dangerous weapons when they are pointed directly at an ancient civilization fighting for its ultimate survival. The Iranian military command did not blink. They publicly dismissed the American threat as nervous, unbalanced, and fundamentally stupid. The vital waterway remains completely closed. The global economy remains entirely hostage. And the American political establishment is now staring directly into the abyss of its own arrogant making. The American empire has finally reached the absolute point of no return. The remaining strategic options on the presidential desk are terrifyingly limited, and both lead to an absolute geopolitical disaster. If Washington ultimately blinks, if they decide to back down and quietly retreat to avoid a catastrophic ground war, the delicate illusion of American global supremacy instantly shatters. The entire post-World War II international order collapses overnight, and the watching globe realizes that the undisputed superpower can be successfully bled to death by cheap drones and patient proxy militias. But if Washington stubbornly chooses the alternative, if the president gives the definitive order to send thousands of American Marines marching directly into the fortified Zagros Mountains, they are knowingly stepping into the exact same lethal trap that swallowed Rome, shattered the Mongols, and broke the Soviet Union. Every great empire arrogantly believes it is the sole exception to the rule. Every empire blindly believes its advanced technology and massive wealth will somehow rewrite the ancient, unforgiving laws of geography and mathematics. They are always wrong. This is absolutely not a scripted Hollywood movie. There is no guaranteed triumphant ending where the hero safely plants a flag in the burning desert. The decisions being made right now in highly classified Pentagon briefings will permanently define the remainder of the century. The true graveyard of empires is patiently waiting for its newest occupant. The global board has fundamentally changed, and the American taxpayer is about to foot the most devastating bill in human history. If you want to deeply understand these brutal realities before the mainstream media aggressively sanitizes the truth, subscribe to this channel right now. Share this vital intelligence with anyone who needs to understand why the world is fracturing. We will be here to decode every single move.